여러분 안녕하십니까?
Hello everyone, I am Lee Won-jae, professor at Kookmin University.
현재 총 6개의 세션이 동시에
We have 6 parallel sessions ongoing, and of the 6 sessions, you chose to attend our session. I would like to thank you. So we will try to live up to your expectation. The 90 minutes of the session will be as informative and helpful
바로 며칠 전까지
as you would expect it to be.
평창에서 얼마 떨어진
In
베이징,
Beijing, Zhangjiakou, and Yanqing, the Winter Olympics were held and closed a few days ago.
관심을 받으면서
It had received a lot of attention, and the Olympics drew to a close. And 4 years ago, around this time, we had the Winter Olympics in PyeongChang and Gangneung.
평창과 강릉에서
In PyeongChang and Gangneung, the Winter Olympics were held, and the legacy that had been left behind
2018
is
기념재단일 것이고요.
the
2018 평창 불령제
2018 PyeongChang Memorial Foundation,
더 구체적으로
and a more specific legacy would be the PyeongChang Peace Forum that we are having for the 4th year.
특히 올림픽에서 대단히 중요하다.
Legacy is considered important in the Olympic Games,
레거시 또는 유산이라는 것이
but
구체적으로 어떤
exactly what is the legacy composed of?
합의된
There is no
누구나 공감할 수 있는
agreed definition
도출되었다.
or enough consensus on what that legacy is.
문제의식을 가지고서
And so we wanted to delve into this further, and there are 2 researchers who studied this subject further. So what is the Olympics legacy, and what are some of the more important elements of the Olympics legacy? That will be the topic that we will be discussing in this session.
아시아 스키 연맹
We have the Asian Ski Federation, which is hosting this session.
연맹은
And as for the Asian Ski Federation,
뭐 매우 활발하다라고 보기 어려운 이 아시아 지역에서
in Asia,
스키라는 스포츠를
it tried to facilitate the sport of ski, which is not as popular in Asia as it is in the European and American countries. So in the Winter Olympics of PyeongChang and Beijing, it had played a significant role and is trying to represent the Asian skiers. And I would like to thank the organizer, ASF, for giving us the opportunity, and we will be sharing the results of the relevant study about the Olympic legacy. I'd like to introduce to you the speakers. We first have Professor Han Seung-jin of Ulji University. He will be speaking first, and followed by Mr. Yoon Sang-hoon, also from Ulji University.
이 두 분의 관계는 대단히 특별한데요.
And they have a very special relationship. Professor Han is the advisor to Mr. Yoon Sang-hoon,
지도하고 계십니다.
who is in his doctorate course.
분들이라면 이게 굉장히
And I'm sure you may
자신의 제자와
sympathize with that feeling of having
기억될 만한
this experience of sharing the session as mentor and mentee. And from Mr. Yoon's perspective, he may be under pressure to present in front of his advisor professor, but at any rate, we will be listening to these 2 gentlemen's presentations, and there will be a panel. And we have as a discussant Professor Nam Sang-baek from Hanyang University.
자, 이제 뭐 제가 말씀드릴 내용은 여기서
So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Han Seung-jin of Ulji University. Please go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Han Seung-jin, and as was introduced, I am a professor at Ulji University. Just now, Dr. Lee has said many good things, and I would like to briefly touch upon my involvement in the study of Olympic legacies. Korea hosted the 1988 Summer Olympics, and 30 years later has hosted the Winter Olympics with resounding success. In 1988, I was just a student in a junior high school, so I did not contribute very much. But since I have grown to become a scholar who specializes in the study of sports history, and ski jump, which is not very popular in Korea, I have taken great interest in this sports category, and I took many students in my class along with me to the PyeongChang Winter Olympics to participate and watch the ski jump competition. IOC has, since 2014, has emphasized the importance of the Olympic legacies. And the Olympic Agenda 2020 also mentions the importance of Olympic legacies, which motivated me to study this further. Most people, when they think about Olympic legacies, they think of things that are intangible, values that are abstract, positive, but intangible and not directly relevant to our daily lives. And in fact, I share the same views about Olympic legacies. So as a scholar, I wanted to come up with some research approaches to study the importance of Olympic legacies. And I have created a team of researchers to carry this research out with me. And we are here to present our findings. Once again, I would like to thank the members of the PyeongChang Commemorative Memorial Foundation for giving me this opportunity. Today, I'm going to talk about a study we did to systemize Olympic legacies. IOC has been emphasizing the importance of the long-term benefits of Olympics, and this research is in connection to that effort. As was mentioned before, there was the PyeongChang Olympics in 2018, and then the Tokyo and Beijing Olympics. So a series of Olympics have taken place in Northeast Asian region. And in Gangwon, in 2024, the Winter Youth Olympic Games will take place. So since 2018, all the way up to 2024, a series of Olympics have been held and will be held in the Northeast Asian region. So it is important to recognize the legacies of the Northeast Asian Olympic Games. In 2014, the Olympic Agenda 2020 mentions that the IOC has a special interest in preserving and spreading the Olympic legacies. And the Olympic Charter also states that one of the key aims of the Olympic movement is to promote a positive legacy from the Olympic Games to the host cities, regions, and countries. And so how can we better leverage the Olympic legacies in the host countries and also to spread the Olympic legacies down the road are important objectives of the IOC and also the host countries. Despite the importance of this topic, not enough research has been done on this very topic, especially in the case of Korean scholars. They have looked at the potential for hosting future Olympics in Korea and what sort of policies can help further the benefits of Olympics within the local context, but not enough focus has been given to the legacies themselves. As researchers, it is, of course, important to study the policies that are involved in promoting the benefits of Olympics, but I think before that, we really need to look into what the actual legacies are. And so the expected long-term benefit of Olympic Games are the key legacies that IOC has been emphasizing, and we studied this topic further to delve into the actual legacies that can be accrued to the host countries. So we proposed this research project to the National Research Foundation of Korea, and we received a grant for this project, and we have completed the first year of this research project, and we have another year remaining. If you look at the table on the top, there are 7 areas of long-term benefits from the Olympic Games. And within those 7 areas, there are 39 specific legacies. So when IOC first publicized this sort of list, they based this on a research that they took on their own, and they have identified these 7 areas and the 39 specific legacies that belong to these 7 areas. But after this list was announced by IOC, since IOC is not a scholarly organization, they have not really followed up with further research. Of course, there are grant programs that support research into Olympic legacies. However, there are not many research projects underway with a focus on the Olympic legacies. So we wanted to look at the importance of the 7 areas and also the 39 legacies, and in what order of priorities they are significant. And based on our experience of preparing for and hosting the 1988 Summer Olympics and the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, we looked at these legacies and see which are very important and how they are aligned with the 7 areas. So we utilized we did our study using the Delphi method, and there were 4 rounds of consultations with the experts. So from the first round to the 4th round, we looked at conducting a better translation of the Olympic legacies from English to Korean. And we also looked at the hierarchical relationship between the 39 legacies and also the relative importance of these legacies. So one of the key things about this research was to come up with a list of experts to invite to this project, because there are 39 Olympic legacies that we're going to look into, and it was very important for us to identify the most relevant experts who can add value to the Delphi methodology. So as you can see in this table, there are some people who got involved from the policy perspective, and then there are also scholars who study Olympics, and also there are experts who are currently working in international sports organizations and Olympics related organizations. So we selected a list of experts, and it took us actually 3 to 4 months to identify the experts to invite. And some people were abroad, and there were schedule conflict. So we conducted this research through email mostly. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank those experts for participating in this project. And as I mentioned before, we took on the translation of the Olympic legacies from English to Korean. And this was not done just for merely understanding the concepts, but we actually had experts get involved in the translation so that we have an agreed set of terms to discuss the Olympics legacies. So initially, we hired a professional translator to translate the Olympic legacies from English to Korean, and then we got the experts involved to look at the translation draft and revise accordingly. Of course, when we were translating, we wanted to take into account the IOC's original, and we wanted to preserve the original intent of the IOC's terminologies to our best ability. Although initially we thought perhaps we could make this so that it's better understood by the local community here, unless it was very, very difficult for the local audience to understand, we generally stuck to the original intent of the IOC so that we have a common grounds for understanding. And as you can see on this slide, the legacies that are highlighted in red were the ones where experts had different views about the appropriate translation. So these are the key ones that you should focus on, but let me just touch upon a few of those. First of all, in the area of organized sports development, enhanced support to athletes and new generation of elite level athletes, and improved efficiency of the organized sports system. So these were some of the translations that you can see on the right side of these concepts. And for the area of social development through sport, health and well-being benefits from the practice of recreational sport, and also all the way down to gender and inclusiveness, these concepts were all translated, as you can see in the column to the right. And in the area of human skills, networks, and innovation, there are aspects of different concepts that were translated, and also urban development is another area. And environment enhancement is a big topic nowadays, and this is an area of Olympic legacies. And also there is the economic value and brand equity. So we have a list of Olympic legacies that fall into these broad areas of legacies which have been translated. And I have published the results in the latter half of 2021 in an academic journal. So if you're interested, you can search for the paper that was submitted to look at the official translation of the Olympic legacies. And we also looked at the fit between the specific Olympic legacies and the 7 areas. So the 7 areas, as proposed by IOC, are something that we can, as scholars and experts, can agree to. But when it comes to the specific legacies that are categorized in these areas, some of them, were questionable in terms of how relevant they are to the local culture and local community here in Korea. So we discussed with the experts to review the alignment or the relevance of the specific legacies in each of the 7 areas. And as you can see, these legacies are in the order of alignment or relevance from top to bottom. So the enhanced athlete support was deemed as being most relevant to the area of development of organized sports. And sports equipment, which is at the bottom of the box that's marked in red, that was deemed as the least relevant to this particular area of development of organized sports. And in the box that's marked in orange, we have the area social development through sports. And I mention these colors because we wanted to sort of express visually the fitness between the 7 areas and the Olympic legacies, which is why we color-coded these 7 areas. And in this area, health and well-being benefits from the practice of recreational sport was deemed as the most relevant to this particular category of social development through sports. And the least relevant was deemed to be gender and inclusiveness. Now, in the area of new generation of human skills network and innovation, the most relevant legacy in this area was identified as new networks, volunteers, diplomatic connections, and staff. And then innovation in different fields was considered the least relevant and least fit for this particular area of human skills network and innovation. And in the culture and creative development area, the increased visibility of national culture was deemed most relevant to this area, but the new design, brand, and visual identity was found to be least relevant. And when it comes to the urban development category, the transport and mobility infrastructure development was found by our experts to be most relevant to this category. This is probably because when we prepared for the 2 Olympic Games, there was a lot of infrastructure development which we still benefit from. And then in the category of environment enhancement, the legacy of enhanced sustainability and environmental awareness was found to be most relevant, while biodiversity protection and restoration was felt by our experts to be least relevant to this particular category. And then economic value and brand equity category. In this category, increased global profile and visibility of city was deemed to be most relevant. Finally, I'm going to talk about the relative hierarchy and importance of the 39 legacies. As I mentioned before, there are 7 broad categories, and then there are the 39 legacies that belong to these 7 categories. And statistically speaking, the relationship were significant. So the 39 legacies were statistically relevant to the specific category that they belong to. And the third outcome of this research was driven by our curiosity to delve into this further. In the case of Korea, when we host the Olympics, people may speculate that, the sports will be promoted, there may be some urban development, but of the 39 legacies, which are the top priority is something that we wanted to look into further. And we've had very interesting results coming from a prioritization of these legacies. On the top, that is viewed as the top priority. So that is improvement of health and well-being through increased sports and physical activity. That was the legacy that was found to be the top priority. I mean, I'm a scholar and I have my team of researchers who worked on this project, and we felt this outcome was very significant. The areas that are marked in red, so that is the development of organized sports. So when you think of Olympics, you think about these various sports categories. And you would immediately think that the development of organized sports would be the biggest and the most important legacies coming out of Olympic Games, but actually these were ranked lower in the list. So that was quite interesting for us. So at least in the perspective of experts, the top priority legacies of the Olympic Games were actually urban development and social development. And we can see this from the list of legacies in the order of importance. That's on this slide. In fact, the Seoul Olympics is often mentioned as an example of the development of a city and the rise in the profile of the city as a result of hosting the Olympic Games. And you can see that here urban development was on the top of the list of important legacies. Yesterday, I participated in the dinner with many VIP participants in this forum. And the governor of Gangwon province talked about potatoes because potatoes are important crop in Gangwon province, and Gangwon province is in fact known for its potatoes. But having hosted the PyeongChang Winter Olympics has helped improve the profile of Gangwon province and change the mindset of people towards Gangwon province and what people remember about Gangwon province. Now you can see that the development of organized sports categories marked in red occupy the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 15th and 17th places, which were relatively lower than what we had expected initially. And if we look at which legacies were considered least important, so for example, the sports equipment, the development of sports equipment was considered one of the least important legacies. Olympic Games is made up of different sports matches, And yet, the legacy of development of sports equipment and advancement of sports equipment were found to be one of the least important legacies, and we thought this was quite interesting. And we had 4 rounds of Delphi methodology-based interaction with the experts. And if this were done by just myself and just my team, you may wonder whether this is actually an accurate assessment. But again, we had invited outside experts to give their views, and our research was done with the highest standards and the most reliable research methodologies, so you can really have confidence in this assessment. Now, one of the disappointing aspects was the low level of priority given to the legacy category of cultural and creative development. Now, opening ceremony and closing ceremony of the Olympic Games are often filled with wonderful cultural performances that are representative of the host country. But then they often are just an event, a one-off event. So it does not necessarily contribute significantly to the cultural and creative development that is a legacy of the Olympic Games. Now, in 2017, the IOC produced a document listing the expected long-term benefits, and we, again, initially began with the translation of this document from English to Korean. And this was done because there was a practical need to do so. There are a slew of bodies that are involved in pursuing the hosting of Olympic Games. So there are different government agencies that are involved, and there are different civil society entities, and we needed to look at the Olympic legacies and discuss amongst these different bodies how to promote these legacies. But of course, we need to be on the same page in terms of the legacies themselves, and this is why we took on the translation of the expected long-term benefits document. And then the alignment or the fit between the 39 legacies and the 7 areas. Well, we found, again, statistically, there is significant alignment between the 39 legacies and the respective 7 categories that they belong to. And we may see further research concerning the relative importance of the different legacies and or how they are correlated with other variables. So the priority and importance of the 39 legacies was an important aspect of our research, because people want to understand which legacies should be prioritized over others. Because if we entered into the competition of becoming a host of the Olympic Games, we need to think about what sort of legacies we want to focus on and what legacies we want to preserve more than others. And this kind of research can serve as a guide So we are now in the second year of the research project. And right now, our research is focused on the citizens of the host city of the Olympics here in Korea. And the National Research Institute Foundation of Korea, which has provided the grant for us, this 2-year project, we are going to actually submit a follow-up proposal after this project is over to the same foundation so that we can continue this study. So there are, again, the 7 legacy categories in which there are specific 39 categories, but while there has been a definition of these different legacies, no methodology has been developed to actually measure these legacies. So we are going to carry out a research project to maybe create some sort of an indices that could help measure the different legacies. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for listening to my presentation on the results of our findings. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Dr. Han, for your presentation. Dr. Han has provided a very informative presentation. Everyone agrees that Olympic legacies are important and we need to preserve them, but no one really goes into understanding what specific legacies they are and what they mean. And I think this research, therefore, is very significant. Our forum is not just for academic experts, so I think there might be some people in the audience who are not familiar with the concept of the Delphi methodology. In the past, when science was less developed, there was no systematic approach to predict the future. And oftentimes, a particular group would seek the oracle from the god they believe in, and there would be maybe a temple, and they would seek the oracle to be handed down to them from their god. And now, what the modern form of that is the Delphi methodology. So Dr. Han has invited most relevant experts who can contribute to this discussion and asked questions about which legacies are most important and sought their opinions to really have a concrete look into what these legacies mean. And the experience and the knowledge and the wisdom of the experts were drawn into this research. So the Delphi methodology makes this possible. Now, I thought that maybe the research foundation was represented here in this forum because Dr. Han repeatedly thanked the foundation. But anyhow, I think they provided a very important grant. And now I would like to invite Mr. Yoon Sang-hoon, who is in the doctorate program at Ulji University. So please get ready to deliver your presentation.
And as I mentioned before, if you're a teacher, and if you are presenting in front of your students, that would be a rewarding experience. But vice versa, the student would be feeling a lot of pressure to be presenting in front of his teacher. So let us give him a round of applause. Hello, everyone. I would like to present the result of the study on the relative importance of expected long-term effect of the Olympics. I am Yoon Sang-hoon. I'd like to thank the attendees for participating in this session. Professor Han gave us a very good presentation, and there are some of the contents that overlap. As for the methodologies, there was a significant difference, so I'd like to inform you of that in advance. So the conservation and promotion of Olympics legacy through the development of the Olympic legacy portfolio is the session title, and there have been many activities in that regard. Bylaws were established. The Legacy Foundation was established. We're having the PyeongChang Peace Forum. So we have these different projects and programs. And we will be having the Gangwon 2024 Youth Olympic Games, and we will have the PyeongChang International Children's Winter Games in 2024 and 2023 respectively, and there will be a peace theme park built in PyeongChang. And as was mentioned in Dr. Han's presentation, the expected long-term benefits, 7 domains and 39 elements were proposed by IOC in its 2017 study, but the legacy framework has not been reviewed substantially. It is a wide-ranging topic, and the literature to date does not provide any specific or consistent definition or scope. So there has not been much effort trying to accumulate the current knowledge about the Olympics legacy. And there's inconsistency in defining and contextualizing and measuring the legacy. And there are differences about the Olympic legacy from the Western countries and the Asian countries. So that is acting as a sort of a barrier. So that is the background from which I began this study. There are 7 domains mentioned by the IOC for the expected long-term benefits and the 39 elements. And I conducted an in-depth study. I looked at the relative importance amongst the 7 areas, and amongst the 39 elements, and looking at the East Asian Olympic Games that have been held so far, I tried to produce the priorities in legacy management. There are 7 domains and 39 elements. That is the research topic. And the same panel was composed. 12 experts were asked to give their opinions. And as was explained by the moderator, I used the Delphi method, a total of 3 rounds, and AHP method was also used. And we need to look at the expected long-term benefits with the basic structure of the 7 domains and 39 elements. And so we compared between the pairs, and we needed 3 rounds to get reliable data. So we got reliable answers from the experts panel, and if you look at the results, the relative importance amongst the 7 domains Social development through sport came as the first with the weight of 0.253, followed by economic value and brand equity, urban development, organized sports development, environment enhancement, human skills network and innovation, and culture and creative development with a weight of 0.050 came up as least important. But it's not to say it's not important. The relative importance falls behind the other domains. Looking at the relative importance within the domain, in sports, in organized sports development, enhanced support to athletes came up the highest. And in social development through sport, well-being through sports came up as highest. And in human skill network and innovation, new human network came up as important. And in creative development, the visibility and profile of the national culture came up as important. In urban development, the infrastructure for mobility and transportation came up as most important. In environment improvement, leisure and green space came up as the most important. And as for economic and brand value, the global status improvement came up as highest. And Olympics movement brand enhancement came up as least important. And looking at the organized sports development, high performance training center or sports equipment came up as less important because the Olympics are considered as sports for all and trying to have a more general foundation to promote sports among the general population. And I think that opinion was reflected in the experts panel. And in environment enhancement, greenery and more space, sustainability, these came up as relatively more important, and biodiversity protection and restoration came up as less important. And for human skills network, new human network and human skills development came up as higher, but discovering new talents came up as less important. And of the 7 dimensions, the culture and creative development came up as least important. And in that category, promoting the culture of the nation came up as most important. And intangible cultural asset of Olympism came up as least important. So what do they tell us about the way forward and what are the implications? We looked at the total ranking. We looked at the whole 39 elements and ranked them in order. And if you look at the results of the 39 elements, the top 5, health and well-being benefits from recreational sport and physical activity came up as the most important, with a global weight of 0.117, and transport and mobility infrastructure development. And PyeongChang Olympics had the keyword of peace. So peace building and international cooperation was third important. Increased global profile and city visibility. And basic urban infrastructure was the top 5. And you may refer to the document for the rest of the ranking. And let's look at the elements with the least relative importance. New design brand and visual identity ranked 35. High performance training center for elite students. Artistic activities developed through the ceremonies and cultural Olympic programs. Intangible cultural heritage of Olympism. And sports equipment ranked the lowest in terms of relative importance in the 39 elements. So the need for the study and looking at the result of the study, we were able to draw the following conclusions. So of the 7 domains, social development through sport was considered the most important. And this is because the most important legacy for the host country and the host city is social development through sport, not just the sport itself. And so this is the legacy that needs sustainable management throughout the years. And looking at the 39 elements of the long-term expected benefits, the health and well-being benefits from recreational sport and physical activity came up as the most important. Olympics are a sports event and promoting the health of the people, encouraging their participation. These will require some policy measures. As for the Summer Olympics, sports participation rate in the UK after the London Olympics went up greatly. That was confirmed by research. But in Korea, after the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, how did the people's participation in the winter sports change? There was no research done showing that there was a dramatic increase at the grassroots level. The practitioners and the academia need to provide some policy measures to increase the participation rate. And looking at the relatively less important areas, it was the culture and creative development. It was the lowest ranking domain, and of the 39 lowest ranking elements in the bottom 5, 3 were also from the culture and creative development. I think there is not enough conceptual definition about the intangible legacy. We need to define the concept of intangible culture and legacy. Other literature does not mention what it exactly means to develop culture through the Olympics. What are the causal relationships between the Olympics and the cultural development, and how the Olympics can contribute to cultural development. So we need some more studies on that subject. So what are some of the specific examples of cultural development through the Olympic Games? So that is our future challenge. In closing, I was wondering what I should close my presentation with, but as for Gangneung, the number of tourists increased compared to before the Olympics. The train route was created and there were more tourists visiting Gangneung. The usage rate is 85%, the highest among the KTX route users. The Olympics legacy is not something that we should just casually encounter. There needs to be meticulous preparation in advance so that we can establish the right Olympic legacy. The Youth Olympics is 2 years away, and we need to make every cent count. In order to promote and preserve the right and proper legacy, we have to plan ahead to establish the right legacy. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Yoon. Before he began his presentation, I thought that he would need encouragement because I thought he would be timid like me because I was like that when I was in my doctorate program. But I think he proved to be a qualified PhD candidate, and I would like to thank you for your wonderful presentation. And I think you did Professor Han proud. Thank you for the presentation. And now we are going to begin the panel discussion. Let us proceed in this manner. We have many people in the audience. So what I'd like to propose is Professor Nam is going to comment on the 2 papers and may ask questions if there are any. And each speaker will be given 1 question each by the discussant, and then we'll take questions from the floor. You may feel free to ask questions or make comments. And in the second round, Professor An will ask his next questions and then take another round of questions from the floor. So let's go maybe 3 to 4 rounds, as long as the time permits us. So with that, I would like to invite Professor Nam from Hanyang University.
Thank you for that introduction. I am Nam Sang-baek from Hanyang University. Our topic is the conservation and promotion of Olympic legacy through development of the Olympic legacy portfolio. And the 2 speakers have enlightened us with a very in-depth research findings. And I'm very grateful for this very informative and very scholarly presentation. And the conceptual definition of Olympic legacies was very informative, and I think it really helped provide a perspective on how we should look at the legacies. When we think about Olympics here in Korea, we always remember the 88 Seoul Olympics. So what were the outcomes, the lasting outcomes of the Seoul Olympics? And also we think about the different legacies between the Seoul Olympics and PyeongChang Olympics. I think there might be some differences. And through what analysis and through what efforts should we promote and preserve the Olympic legacies and try to make the benefits really long-lasting. And I think the 2 speakers touched upon these points very well. Olympic legacies, when I think about that, there were 7 domains that were mentioned today, and then the 39 elements were outlined. And I wonder what other aspects there are with regards to Olympic legacies. And I wanted to ask Dr. Han, since he participated in the Winter Olympics and he really enjoyed the Olympic Games as he conducted his research, and I was a witness to the whole process, and I did also participate in the research project itself. Dr. Han was motivated to conduct this research by questions he had about what Olympic legacies are and also the concept of expected long-term benefits as proposed by as was proposed by IOC. So I want to ask whether his concept of Olympic legacies were different in any way from the long-term benefits proposed by IOC. And what other aspects should we take into account? Can you repeat your first question, please? So the IOC document has proposed the 7 domains and the 39 elements that make up the list of long-term benefits. So do you think that there may be elements that should be added, and are there aspects that you think need more emphasis than was emphasized by IOC? The reason why I missed the first question that Dr. Nam asked, because I was thinking about my experience at PyeongChang Olympics, because he did say I enjoyed it very much. But anyway, the 7 domains, I think, are well defined by IOC. But I think one aspect that is lacking is an emphasis on education of Olympic values. Of course, there are aspects such as nurturing a future generation of athletes, but I think there is a little bit of a lack when it comes to educating the Olympic values and Olympic legacy. And I think to have long-lasting outcomes from the Olympic Games requires education. And the values are always very relevant to our daily lives. And sports is a little cosmos on its own. So I think we need to really educate the younger generation about the Olympic values. Thank you very much for that response. As Mr. Yoon mentioned, there needs to be a planned and systematic approaches. And I thank you very much for that response. Dr. Han's, in connection to Dr. Han's presentation, there were certain aspects that I wanted to think about further, and I also have some recommendations about future research efforts. Well, one question is with regards to the research methodology. So Delphi methodology and AHP were used. And one question is this. The research findings is really based on the opinions of the experts, and it was a relative hierarchy of priorities based on the views expressed by the experts. But on the one hand, you can have these experts and their perspectives and views on the Olympic legacies and their priorities, but then also there may be people, for example, the citizens of Gangwon province, and they might have a different list of priorities when it comes to the Olympic legacies. I think that there might be a difference between the views of the experts and the views of the local residents. So I think it would be meaningful if you could make a comparison to see if there are any variance between these two different groups of people. And another question about your presentation, especially with regards to what is relevant and what is not relevant when it comes to the 39 elements. I wondered whether such an assessment of relative relevance would be replicated in other countries, or whether this is specific to Korea.
저희가 지금 가지고 있는 올림픽 유산에
And
위계도 차이가 존재하지 않을까?
I think there might be also some sort of a different
관계 있게
view on the
그때 1988년
hierarchy of priorities between cities that were not involved in hosting the Olympics here in Korea and the city in Korea that was a host. And will there be a difference between Korea and other countries that have not had the experience? And I wonder whether there are variations between these different places when it comes to the list of priorities, when it comes to these 39 elements. Or there might be a difference in views between the advanced economies and the less developed economies. The relative priorities may be quite different depending on the level of economic development. And that's just my speculation, but there are these questions that came up as I listened to your presentation. So I think this would be a very interesting research topic. So depending on the relative economic status of the host country or city, there may be different prioritization or different hierarchy of importance of these 39 elements. I think that would also help further develop the promotion strategy for legacies.
Mr. Yoon, you talked about the relative importance among the 7 domains. So could you explain the significance of that relative importance?
네, 남성 교수님, 좋은
Professor Nam, thank you for the question. So what is the significance behind the relative importance to promote and conserve the legacy? You need to manage efficiently because you have limited resources. You have to find out which is more important and what area needs more resources. So we need to have that in mind to manage the legacy properly. So to do that, we have to look at the relative importance and the priority to manage the legacy more efficiently with the limited resources. Thank you. Thank you very much.
하나만 잠시만요. 이 코멘트를 잠깐 드리고 싶은데.
I would like to make a comment or rather a question.
본 연구를 진행하셨던
So,
선생님께서
Mr. Yoon, you conducted this research.
척도에 제시되어 있는 그 개념으로 말씀해 주시지 마시고 정말 평창 올림픽이 남겨 있는 유산은 뭐라고 생각하세요?
Olympics. What do you think is the true legacy of PyeongChang Olympics? Well, personally speaking, sports and physical activity, encouragement and promotion, I think that is not enough. But we are having this PyeongChang Peace Forum, and I think that spirit of peace and reconciliation between the two Koreas is also a very important legacy because after the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, we were able to have the talks between the two leaders of the Koreas. Yes, I think this could have some implications on other areas such as diplomacy as well. Okay, now I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have 6 parallel sessions, and this may be by far the most academic, and I think we could entertain a lot of the questions from the floor. You could ask questions or make comments. If you have anything to add to this conversation, please raise your hand. Yes, please.
네, 안녕하세요.
Hello.
이번에 평창 평화 포럼 그 청년위원
I am a member of the Youth Commission of PyeongChang Peace Forum, Chang Jun-hwan.
너무 잘
I'd like to thank you for the presentation. It was quite informative, and I was able to satisfy some of my curiosities.
연구 계획들에 대해서 저는 또
I am curious about your future research plans. So you have the top 5 or the bottom 5 elements.
동계 올림픽
So with these findings,
대해서 정량적인 평가도 한번 해보실
do you have any plans to do some quantitative evaluation of the PyeongChang Winter Olympics?
위원님 좋은 질문 감사합니다.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chang.
이 질문 관련해서는 아마 이제 한승진 교수님께서
Professor Han, maybe you could answer the question.
의견을 드리면
And let me add my opinion. 4 years ago, when the Winter Olympics were held in Pyeongchang, and 1 or 2 weeks ago, when the Winter Olympics were going on in Beijing, the Olympics Organizing Committee is a one-off entity. After organizing the Olympic Games, it is disbanded. 17 days, 2 weeks, and a weekend, they have to handle explosive amount of workload. And due to the characteristics of that Olympics, it's very difficult for that organizing committee to think about the after. But nonetheless, they have to deal with the legacy part of the Olympics. So with the limited amount of time and resources, they have to think about how to prioritize well and how to tackle the legacies one by one. IOC has proposed the 39 elements in the 7 domains. So of these, which requires more time and resources, the guidelines could be there or not. So having this will determine the future outcome of legacy management. Professor Han has conducted this research. In 2024, we are going to have the Gangwon Youth Olympic Games, and it will be pretty much the same with the limited amount of resources and time. On which legacy should we prioritize and manage to get efficient and effective outcome? So in that regard, I think this could act as a very helpful guideline. So please, Mr. Han, could you answer the question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chang, for that question. Just to give you some broad responses, I would like to touch upon our future plans for research and also the question that you raised. During my presentation, I repeatedly mentioned that this is a research project that cannot remain just a research project for an individual scholar, but this is why we sought research grant. And again, the presentation was covering the first year findings from our project, which is 2 years. And going forward, we are going to focus our research on the local residents in the host city. And I hope that I will have an opportunity in the future to share the findings from this latter part of the research project. And you talked about whether there is a plan to do a quantitative research on the top 5 legacies and also the bottom 5 elements, and the evaluation of those in the context of the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. I think that is an important research topic to take on. And I think students of master's or the PhD programs, I think, could also get involved in such research. I mean, our findings have been published in an academic journal last year, including the translation of the long-term expected benefits document. So using that, the research could be carried out to ask the cities, what sort of outcomes were achieved with regards to the top five and bottom five elements, and what sort of capacities were developed with regards to those elements. And I think it will be very meaningful to also look at the bottom five elements to see how we can maybe better improve our efforts to get the bottom five elements, up in terms of the benefits. So now we will receive the second question. Hello. I am participating as one of the advisory committee members. My name is Yoon Yu-shik, and I worked in the organizing committee for the Winter Olympics. And also, I did some analysis on the Atlantic Olympics, and now I'm in the academia. But since we're talking about the Olympic legacies, this is a topic that is of great interest of mine, so I'm here. And yes, there are the 7 domains and 39 elements that were defined by the IOC. And right now, for example, in UK and Australia, there are event legacy managers or event legacy management committees. So they have these organs or experts who focus really on legacy management itself. In Korea, we have been talking about the importance of legacies, and of course the legacy aspect needs to be mentioned in the bid document. So we do have an interest in the legacies, but I think there is the issue of effective legacy management, because urban development and economic development, these are very macro issues and macro agenda. And when you're organizing a sports event, we always focus on the final outcomes, of course, and the focus will always be on legacies that will contribute to the development of the economy and the society. So I think the big question is how effectively we can manage the legacies. We understand the importance of the legacy management, and I think perhaps we could have an enactment of a legislation that would define ways in which we can manage these legacies, because they do have an important contribution to the local development and also to urban development. And we do need to preserve and further spread the long-term benefits. Thank you very much, Mr. Lim, for that great question. I think that was both a comment and a question combined. And I think it is because of the issue that you raised that Dr. Han carried out his research. Unless you can measure, it's difficult to manage. So since the legacies have been identified, and yet there is little methodological approach defined to measure those legacy elements. So how to quantify and how to prioritize are important, and this is why Dr. Han's team have conducted this research. And they're also planning to develop a value measurement indices.
사실 그 IOC에서도 그 레거시의
IOC, when proposing a list of legacies, they talked about the vision of the host city and also the Olympic movement and the vision of the stakeholders in hosting the Olympic Games. So these all contribute to the Olympic legacies. Agenda 2020 has been published and generally, the host country is selected 7 years before the actual games. And the legacy really begins to form from the time that the host city, submits the bid, not necessarily after the Olympic Games. So I think it is important to think about legacies from the very early stages. And with regards to this, perhaps Dr. Nam, can you respond?
정말 현실적인
Yes, you asked a very practical question that's really close to our heart. When we talk about the Olympics legacy, what comes to mind? I think these studies started from that question. Before understanding what the Olympics legacies are, I think we first have to think about what did the host city show the audience? Did we show what we plan to show the rest of the world? And will that translate to the legacy? And was that process well managed? What was mentioned earlier, I think there are areas of improvement. At the government level, when the local governments make a bid to host the Olympic Games, the central government shares the burden. But after winning the bid, in terms of managing the legacy, then it's wholly up to that local government. So that host city holds that much accountability because they have to have a vision of what to show. Of course, we could talk about the cultural heritage in very vague terms, but we have to be more specific and concrete. So the question raised from the floor is quite realistic. Of course, it would be good to have the Legacy Foundation, and the Korean Sports Association is conducting relevant activities. But establishing a new entity at the government level is not as easy. And so this is just my personal opinion. I'm not basing it on any legal documents. As for the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, there was this 5-year preparation period in which the human resources were trained and nurtured, but it was not a guaranteed outcome that we would win the bid. We had very good managers and we had very good experts trained, and after the Olympics were over, we could not retain them. And when the next Olympic comes or when the mega sports events come, then we have to train a new pool of resources. It would be wonderful to have access to the former human resources. Then it would be more effective and efficient. So it would be nice to have a relevant body. Maybe we could have of course, KOICA is involved in these international exchanges, and it's difficult to establish a new entity inside that. Maybe we could have some more defined job descriptions given to a certain body, or give more authority and more responsibility to a relevant division. I think we need to have a more systematic approach. So what did we show as Olympics legacy? What was the performance? What vision did we show them? What is the reason for the people to come back to PyeongChang? What part of PyeongChang remains in the people's hearts and memories? I think we have to answer that question first, and that's why I offer to answer that question. Thank you for your comment, Professor Nam. Yes, we'll take the next question from the floor. Hello, I am a professor at Gyeonggi University Sports Management. I'd like to thank you for sharing the result of a very wonderful study, and thank you for all the relevant questions from the floor and the responses from the panel. So I think my question is in the same line of questions. I have a question for Professor Han.
So if we prepare with the priority of legacies in mind for the 2024 Youth Olympic Games, what should be the top elements that we need to focus on, is my question. This may be a rather broad question, but I think it would be quite important as we work towards the 2024 Youth Olympic Games. And also I have a question for Mr. Yoon. Well, I have walked the path as an academic scholar and as a professor, and as I look back to my past, I felt that there were some things I could have done better. And I think those learnings have helped me to carry on. So now, in the context of the Olympics, you did mention that there were some lack in terms of the policy approaches to further the legacies of the Olympics. Well, I actually participated in the '88 Summer Olympics in Seoul as a volunteer, and there were many events in which I participated in. Also in PyeongChang, there were a lot of mega-scale events that took place, and still, you are saying that there were lack of policy measures in terms of organizing and promoting the legacies of the Olympic Games. So, I think you need to be more specific about what lack of policy measures and what your recommendations are in terms of policy measures to improve the current situation. And also there was a mention of how there was a lack of definition for the concepts. So do you want to provide a definition of the concepts? And what Olympic legacy, what is your definition of the different Olympic legacies? Because since you pointed out that there is really a lack of clear definitions. So Dr. Sal, thank you very much for that question. So you asked Mr. Han what we should focus on as we work towards the Gangwon 2024 Youth Olympic Games. And to Mr. Yoon, you asked a very fundamental question, really. And despite the fact that Korea has organized a series of important international sports events, and yet there is a lack of systematized approach to leverage the lessons learned from past events. So how we should improve the situation based on our past learnings? I think that was the question raised by Ms. Dr. Seol.
강원도 청소년 동계올림픽 같은 경우는
In the case of the 2024 Youth Olympic Games, well, this is actually the fourth Youth Winter Olympic Games, and this is the first being hosted in Asia. And in terms of the hardware or the infrastructure, we already have the relevant infrastructure because we had hosted the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. So we need to really focus on the soft aspects of this. We are not really an advanced country when it comes to the winter sports. But of course, there are various programs and projects that are targeting the young athletes in countries where winter sports is very difficult to be enjoyed. And so there are young athletes who live in a very challenging environment when it comes to furthering their skills in winter sports. So I think we should really focus on helping those young athletes, and I think that would be the area that we should really focus on when it comes to the Gangwon Youth Olympic Games preparation.
Yes, as for the lack of policy direction, from 2015 to 2021, China had increased the number of participants in the Winter Olympics. So they had the prior experience. And what was it like in PyeongChang and what was it like in Gangneung? I feel the need to study that further. Is it because of the weather? Is it because of the policies? I would like to identify that difference through future studies. And I also was able to relate to your comment about lack of definition in cultural development. This is mentioned in the Korean literature. So how should we view culture? For example, in PyeongChang Olympics, we had the opening ceremony. The drones were used. And should we look at it as technology development, or is it an advancement in ceremonies, or should we look at it from an integrated perspective? So, is it a value, divergent values, or should we look at it from an independent perspective? I think we need to define that first, and then we'll be able to identify the legacies and look at the interrelationships between the different elements. Thank you. We had a very active session composed of presentations and panel discussions. There are many more issues that need to be discussed, but in the interest of time, we now have to close the session. I would like to thank the researchers. The professors and the speakers will be able to stay behind for about 5 minutes. So please approach them and ask them questions offline. I'd like to thank you for your participation, Professor Han Sang-jin, Mr. Yoon Sang-hoon, Professor Nam Sang-baek. Thank you very much. With this, I'd like to close the session. Thank you.